The first thing I heard when I woke up was a nurse saying my name. Not my full name, just the first. The way people say it when they're not sure you can hear them, when they're testing to see if there's still someone home behind the eyes. Then a second voice, farther back in the room. He's alive. There was something in the way she said it. A quality of surprise I couldn't quite place, lying there with the ceiling tiles coming slowly into focus above me. The smell of antiseptic and something floral that might have been a candle or might have been nothing at all. I tried to move and discovered that several parts of my body had opinions about that idea, and all of them were negative. A face appeared above me. The nurse. Young, efficient, already moving, checking something on a monitor, adjusting something near my arm. Mr. Callahan, can you hear me? Yeah, I said. My voice came out wrong. Sandpaper and distance. You're at Mercy General. You were in an accident. You've been here for 3 days. 3 days. I processed that information the way you process things when your brain is still finding its footing. Slowly, without the full weight of it landing. My family, I said. She hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but I caught it. They've been notified, she said. We'll let them know you're awake. I lay there and looked at the ceiling and thought about what it meant that she'd hesitated. It would take me another 6 hours to get my phone back. Another day after that, to read everything that had accumulated in the 72 hours, when my family believed I was gone. I've had a lot of hard days in my life. Days that required the specific, exhausting competence of being the person everyone depended on. I thought I knew what hard felt like. I didn't know yet. My name is Nathan Callahan. I'm the oldest of 3 children, which in my family was less a birth order than a job title. The role came with responsibilities that were never formally assigned, but were so thoroughly understood by everyone involved that they might as well have been written into a contract. I was the one who answered the phone at midnight. I was the one who showed up with a truck when someone needed to move. I was the one who knew which drawer the important documents were in, which insurance company had which policy, which doctor my parents were supposed to see and when. I was 36 when the accident happened. I'd been performing this role for approximately 20 years. My parents, Paul and Margaret Callahan, retired, living in the house I grew up in about 40 minutes outside the city, were good people in the way that people are good when goodness costs them nothing. They were warm at holidays and genuinely happy to see me, and believed, I think sincerely, that family was the most important thing. They also believed, with equal sincerity and no apparent awareness of the contradiction, that their oldest son would handle whatever needed handling. My father had bad knees and a complicated relationship with paperwork. My mother had high blood pressure and a tendency to treat minor logistical problems as emergencies requiring immediate emotional escalation. Together, they generated a steady, low-grade current of need that ran through my life the way background noise runs through an apartment near a highway. You stop noticing it, but it's always there. Then there was my brother, Kevin. Kevin was 33. He had the specific talent of people who move through life in the slipstream of someone more responsible, the ability to arrive at consequences without ever quite arriving at accountability. He'd had 3 jobs in the previous 4 years, each one ending in circumstances that were always, in his telling, the fault of someone else. He owed money to people he'd stopped returning calls to. He had a way of presenting financial need that made it feel collaborative, as if he was bringing me an opportunity to participate in something, rather than asking me to save him from something. I had lent Kevin money 11 times in the previous 6 years. He had repaid me twice, both times partially. I kept a note in my phone, not to confront him with, not to build a case, just to keep track, just so some part of me could hold the reality of it when the rest of me was busy making excuses. My sister Dana was 30. She was the most self-sufficient of us, which in practice meant she'd moved across the country to Portland and constructed a life that required nothing from the family and offered nothing back. She called it birthdays sometimes. She sent Christmas cards with pre-printed signatures. She was not unkind. She was simply absent, the kind of absent that had its own logic, that I understood more clearly the older I got, even if I'd resented it for years. The absence was a form of self-preservation. I just hadn't been ready to call it that. What I'd built over 2 decades of being the reliable one was a family that functioned, that paid its bills and managed its crises and didn't fall apart at the seams, Because I was underneath it, holding it up. I didn't build this consciously. Nobody does. You make one decision, then another, and one day you look up and discover you've become load-bearing. The problem with being load-bearing is that nobody thinks about what happens if you're not there. Until you're not there. The call came on a Friday afternoon in November. I was at my desk. I worked remotely project management for a mid-sized construction firm, the kind of work that requires sustained attention and is constantly interrupted by things that require sustained attention. I'd been trying to close out a vendor dispute that had been running for 3 weeks, and I was close. 2 more emails, maybe a phone call, when my mother's name appeared on my phone. I looked at it for a moment. There is a specific cognitive experience that comes from seeing your mother's name on your phone when you're in the middle of something. A brief, automatic calculation. How urgent? How long? What will it cost me? Not because you don't love her, because you've done this enough times to know the distribution. I answered, "Hi, Mom." "Nathan." Her voice had that particular frequency, not quite distress, not quite fine, the register of something being managed. "I'm so glad you picked up. What's going on?" She told me about a problem with the furnace. The technician had come and quoted a number she didn't understand, and she wasn't sure if it was reasonable, and your father tried to call, but the company put him on hold, and she didn't know who else to ask. I asked her to read me the quote. She read it. It was reasonable. I told her it was reasonable. She seemed relieved but not entirely convinced, and we went around the loop twice more before she was satisfied. Then, before we hung up, "Have you talked to Kevin lately?" A different frequency now. The one that preceded a request she was making on someone else's behalf. "Not this week," I said. "He's in a bit of a situation." A pause. "His landlord it's complicated. He might need some help with rent this month." I looked at my screen. The vendor email half-drafted, the cursor blinking. "How much?" I said. She told me. It was not the first time. It would not, I understood, be the last. "I'll call him," I said. "You're such a good brother, Nathan." She meant it. That was the thing that made it complicated. She meant it completely, without any awareness that the compliment and the expectation were 2 sides of the same coin. That calling me a good brother was also calling me a resource, and that the resource was expected to stay available. We said goodbye. I finished the email. I called Kevin, got his voicemail, left a message telling him I'd transfer him the money that evening. Then I checked the weather for the drive home. The storm had been building all day, one of those systems that arrives from the northwest in November with the patient inevitability of something that was always going to happen. Rain, the forecast said, possibly heavy at elevation. Road conditions variable. My parents' house was at elevation. I'd been planning to drive out Saturday morning. But my mother had mentioned, at the end of the call, that my father had a doctor's appointment Monday and couldn't find the referral paperwork. Could I bring it? She thought it might be in the accordion file in my car from the last time. It was in the accordion file in my car. I looked at the weather forecast one more time. Then I closed my laptop, put on my jacket, and went down to the parking garage. The drive that started as an errand. The drive that nearly ended everything. I don't remember much after the first hour on the road. I remember the rain getting heavier. I remember the wipers working hard. I remember a curve in the road that I'd driven 100 times in better conditions, at better speeds. And then I remember nothing at all, until the ceiling tiles, until the nurse saying my name, until he's alive. Apparently, that was surprising news. The truck left the road at approximately 8:40 p.m. I know this from the accident report, which I read 6 weeks later, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold while I worked through it. The investigating officer had reconstructed the sequence with the particular thoroughness of someone who does this often enough to have developed a system for it. Tire marks, impact angles, the position of the vehicle when the search team found it the following morning, down an embankment off Route 9, partially obscured by a stand of Douglas firs that had probably saved my life by slowing the descent. The rain had been heavy enough at that elevation to reduce visibility to approximately 40 feet. The curve was one I'd driven before, 100 times, maybe more, the kind of familiarity that breeds its own danger. You stop treating it as something that requires attention, and it becomes something you navigate on memory alone. And memory doesn't account for standing water and a vehicle doing 8 miles over the speed limit because you were running late and hadn't quite registered how bad the conditions had got. My phone hit the dashboard on impact and then hit something else and stopped working. My seatbelt did what it was supposed to do, which is the reason I'm able to describe any of this in the past tense. I was unconscious before the truck stopped moving. The embankment was steep enough that the vehicle wasn't visible from the road. 2 cars passed that stretch of Route 9 within the following hour. Neither of them saw anything. The rain continued through the night. My mother called my cell at 9:15 p.m. It went to voicemail. She would tell me later that she hadn't been alarmed at first. I sometimes drove through dead zones on that route. I sometimes got distracted and let calls go. She left a message. Something about the furnace technician. A follow-up question that could wait, and set her phone down and watched another 30 minutes of the show she and my father had been working through. At 10:30, she called again. Voicemail. At 11:00, she called Kevin. Kevin answered on the 3rd ring, groggy, clearly just woken up. He didn't know where I was. I'd left him a voicemail earlier. He said he'd been meaning to call back. He asked if I was probably just asleep. My mother said probably. She lay awake until 2:00 a.m., calling every 40 minutes. My father, who slept heavily and wore earplugs, didn't know any of this until morning. By Saturday afternoon, the shape of things had changed. Kevin had driven to my apartment and confirmed my car was gone. My neighbor, a retired teacher named Frank who I'd exchanged keys with years ago for exactly these kinds of situations, let him in. My laptop was on my desk. The lights were off. Nothing suggested I'd come home. Kevin called the construction firm I worked for, got a voicemail, called my direct line. Voicemail. He called Dana in Portland. This was, in retrospect, the phone call that set the temperature for everything that followed. Not because of what Kevin said. He was genuinely worried at that point. I believe that. But because of how Dana received it. She had the particular composure of someone who has spent years managing her emotional responses to this family. And in a crisis, that composure looked like calm, and calm has a way of shaping the room around it. He probably just lost his phone, she said. His car is gone, Dana. He drives to see Mom and Dad all the time. Maybe he stayed over and forgot to charge his phone. Mom says he never arrived. A pause. Okay, Dana said. Let's not catastrophize. Which was reasonable advice. It was also the first brick in a wall that would take 3 days to fully understand. My mother called the police that afternoon. A missing persons report requires 24 hours in most jurisdictions, and the officer who took the initial information was kind but measured. Most cases like this resolve themselves, he said. Adults leave their phones behind more often than people think. Had there been any signs of depression, any unusual behavior recently? My mother said no. The officer said they'd keep an eye out and to call back if nothing had changed by Sunday evening. Sunday evening came. Nothing had changed. The search team found the truck Monday morning. A county road crew working on a drainage issue spotted the tire marks first. The place where the shoulder had given way, the long gouge in the hillside leading down to the tree line. They called it in at 7:20 a.m. A deputy arrived by 7:45. The truck was located at 8:12. I was not in it. The emergency crews found me approximately 40 meters from the vehicle. I had apparently regained consciousness at some point, maybe hours after the impact, maybe longer, and attempted to move toward the road before losing consciousness again. I had no memory of this. My body remembered it differently. The torn knee of my jeans, the abrasions on my palms, the pattern of hypothermia that the medical team would later say suggested I'd been outside, moving in wet conditions for at least an hour. They airlifted me to Mercy General. I was admitted as an unidentified male, approximately mid-30s, severe concussion, 2 cracked ribs, mild hypothermia, multiple lacerations. My wallet had come out of my pocket during the accident and was somewhere in the hillside. My phone was in pieces. The hospital ran my fingerprints through a database. It took until late Monday afternoon to get a match and contact my next of kin, which means that for approximately 72 hours, from Friday night until Monday afternoon, my family operated in the space where I was missing and presumed, by increasing consensus, to be dead. I learned what happened during those 72 hours in pieces. Some of it came from my mother, who told me things she probably shouldn't have, in the disoriented aftermath of learning I was alive, when her filter was down and the truth moved through her faster than her judgment could manage it. Some of it came from Kevin, inadvertently, in a phone call 3 days after I got home, when he said something that didn't line up with something else, and I asked a follow-up question and watched the story unravel in real time. And some of it came from my phone, because when the hospital finally recovered my SIM card, intact, miraculously, from the wreckage of the device, and transferred it to a temporary handset, the messages came through in a cascade. 72 hours of missed calls, voicemails, texts, from friends, from colleagues. From my mother dozens of times, her messages tracking the arc from concern to fear to something that had gone quiet in a way that was worse than fear. And from the family group chat. I sat in my hospital bed on Tuesday evening, 3 days after I'd woken up, and I scrolled through it. I took my time. The first messages were what you'd expect. My mother, Saturday morning, has anyone heard from Nathan? He never arrived last night and isn't answering his phone, trying not to worry. Kevin just checked his apartment. Car's gone, calling around. Dana, I'm sure he's fine, let's not panic. Saturday evening after the police report, the messages got shorter, more clipped. My mother asking for updates. Kevin saying he didn't have any. A cousin named Ricky who I hadn't spoken to in 2 years suddenly appearing in the chat. Just heard. Praying for good news. Sunday was mostly silence in the chat. Calls happening in real time. I assumed. The conversation moving off screen. Then Sunday night. The truck hadn't been found yet. But the absence had reached a duration that crosses a threshold in people's minds. The threshold where missing becomes something else. Kevin wrote, I talked to the officer again. They're expanding the search tomorrow. He said we should be prepared. Prepared. My mother sent a crying emoji. Just that. Dana wrote, okay, we need to think practically. Mom, where does Nathan keep his important documents? I read that twice. Then I kept reading. Dana, does he have a will? I know it's hard to think about, but we need to know what we're dealing with. Kevin, 20 minutes later. I don't think he has a will. We talked about it once. He kept saying he'd get around to it. A pause in the messages. 40-some minutes. Then Kevin again. At least the house loan will be paid off. That's something. The life insurance should cover it. I stared at that sentence for a long time. At least the house loan will be paid off. My brother, 33 years old. His oldest sibling had been missing for 2 days. The truck hadn't been found. My mother was in her house 40 minutes outside the city, calling my phone every 40 minutes, leaving messages into a void. And Kevin was calculating. I scrolled further. My cousin Ricky. Does anyone know if he had savings? Not being morbid, just want to understand the situation. Dana, he had a 401k, and I think a separate savings account. Mom would know. Ricky, what about the car? Is it paid off? I put the phone face down on the blanket. Outside my hospital window, the city was doing what cities do at night, lit and indifferent, moving through its own business. A helicopter crossed distantly. Somewhere below, an ambulance moved through an intersection. I picked the phone back up. There were more messages. I read all of them. By the time I set it down again, something had shifted in me, not dramatically, not with the theatrical quality of a revelation. More like a slow, structural change. The way a building doesn't collapse all at once. The way it settles, incrementally, into a new configuration that can't be undone. I thought about 20 years of phone calls. I thought about Kevin's rent, paid 11 times. I thought about furnace quotes and referral paperwork, and driving through storms because someone needed something, and I was the one who showed up. I thought about the group chat. I thought about, at least the house loan will be paid off. And I thought about what it meant, what it actually, specifically meant, that this was the sentence my brother reached for when he thought I was gone. Not, I can't believe he's not here. Not, I keep thinking I should call him. Not even the simple, honest, I'm going to miss him. Just the house loan. Just the arithmetic of my absence. I sat there in the hospital bed with my cracked ribs and my concussion and my palms that still stung where the gravel had found them. And I let myself understand something I'd been declining to understand for a very long time. They had needed me. That was real. The need was real. But need and love are not the same thing. And for 20 years, I had been letting myself believe they were. The hospital gave me a notebook. One of the nurses, an older woman named Carol who had the particular competence of someone who has seen everything and been surprised by very little, brought it on my second full day of consciousness, along with a pen and the explanation that some patients found it helpful to write things down when they were processing. She said it without elaboration, set it on the tray table, and moved on to the next room. I hadn't asked for it. I think she'd read something in my face during her morning rounds. The specific expression, maybe, of a person trying to contain more information than they'd been designed to hold at once. I used it, not for journaling, not in the therapeutic sense she probably intended. I used it the way I used the note in my phone that tracked Kevin's loans, as a place to put things that needed to be real somewhere outside my own head. I wrote down the messages, the ones from the group chat first, then the others as I found them. Because the group chat was not the only place the conversation had happened. Kevin had called his friend Marcus on Saturday night. I know this because Kevin's voicemail to me, the one he'd left Friday evening, returning my call about the rent money, the one I never received, had been followed by a series of texts between him and Marcus that Kevin had screenshotted and sent to himself, and which had somehow, in the chaos of the following days, ended up forwarded into a text thread that also included me. I don't think he meant to send them to me. I don't think he remembered that I could read them. Marcus had asked what was going on. He'd apparently heard through someone that I was missing, and Kevin had responded in the loose, unguarded way people text their closest friends at midnight when they believe the conversation is private. Honestly, don't know what's going to happen. Nate's been the one holding everything together forever. Marcus, that's rough, man, you okay? Kevin, kind of freaking out. Also kind of thinking about the fact that I owe him like $8,000, and now I don't know what happens with that. Marcus, damn. Kevin, like obviously I hope he's fine. But if he's not, I don't know, it's complicated. I wrote that down in the notebook. It's complicated. I sat with that for a while. The word complicated doing a lot of work, covering a lot of ground. The kind of word you use when the honest version of what you're feeling is something you'd rather not put in writing directly. I thought about the $8,000. I thought about how Kevin had asked for it not all at once, in a single conversation that might have forced a real reckoning. In pieces, over years, each ask modest enough to feel reasonable in isolation. 200 here, 800 there, 1,000 for a situation that was genuinely urgent and just needed a short-term bridge. He'd said he'd pay it back by the end of the month. He'd never paid it back by the end of the month. And I had never said, Kevin, we need to talk about this. I had deposited the money and said call me if you need anything and moved on to the next thing. Because saying the honest thing would have made me the bad guy in a story where I was trying to be the good one. It's complicated. Yeah, it was. Dana had called her husband, Patrick, on Sunday afternoon. I didn't have direct access to that conversation. What I had was a voicemail Dana had left for my mother, found buried in my mother's phone, which she'd handed to me at one point during my first day home while she went to make tea, not thinking about what was on it, or maybe thinking I wouldn't look. I looked. The voicemail was practical. Dana's voice in its practical register, organized, forward-moving, the voice she used when she was managing something. She was calling to check on my mother, she said. She was also calling because she'd been thinking about logistics. If things went the way they might go, someone was going to need to handle my affairs, and since Kevin wasn't really equipped for that kind of thing, and since their parents were going to be overwhelmed, she thought she should probably be the one to step in. She used the phrase, take point on the administrative side. She said, I'm going to call Nathan's firm on Monday to let them know the situation. She said, I think we should probably get someone to look at his apartment sooner rather than later, just to make sure nothing's time-sensitive. I played the voicemail twice. There was nothing cruel in it. That was the thing I kept returning to. Dana wasn't a cruel person. She was a practical one, someone who had survived this family by being useful in ways that didn't cost her anything emotionally, by converting feeling into function, by treating problems as logistics problems because logistics problems had solutions and grief didn't. She was doing what she knew how to do. But somewhere in the voicemail, between asterisk take point on the administrative side and someone to look at his apartment, there was no sentence that said, I can't stop thinking about him. No sentence that said, I keep picking up my phone to call him and then remembering. No sentence that contained my name and the word miss in the same breath. Just the apartment, just the administrative side, just the clean, competent machinery of a person who had decided, years ago, that this family was a thing to be managed from a safe distance. And who was now managing it? I wrote it in the notebook. Then I closed the notebook and looked out the window for a while. My mother came to visit on Wednesday, my third day of full consciousness, 2 days after they'd moved me out of the ICU wing into a regular room. She drove herself, which surprised me. She almost never drove the highway alone. She arrived carrying a container of soup she'd made that morning, still warm inside an insulated bag, and she stood in the doorway of the room for a moment before she came in, the way people stand in doorways when they're preparing themselves. She looked older than she had at Christmas. 3 days will do that, I imagine. 3 days of not knowing. She sat beside the bed and put the soup on the tray table and took my hand and held it without saying anything for a while. Her hands were smaller than I remembered them being. Or maybe I'd stopped paying attention. I prayed, she said finally. Every hour, I want you to know that. I know, Mom. I kept thinking, I kept telling myself you were fine, that you just lost your phone, that there was a simple explanation. She shook her head. But Sunday night, when they still hadn't found anything, she stopped. It's okay, I said. It's not. Her voice was firm suddenly. It's not okay. I should have called you back sooner. Friday night, when you didn't answer, I should have called the police immediately. I kept telling myself I was overreacting. You weren't overreacting. I know that now. She was quiet for a moment. Your father cried, she said. I want you to know that too. He doesn't, you know how he is. But Monday morning, when we still didn't know, he sat at the kitchen table and cried. I've seen your father cry 3 times in 40 years of marriage. I thought about my father at the kitchen table. His bad knees. His complicated relationship with paperwork. The way he'd squeeze my shoulder at holidays and not quite say what he meant. Something moved through me that I didn't have clean language for. Where is he? I asked. He didn't want to drive, his knees. She paused. He wanted to come. He asked me to tell you that. Tell him I know. She held my hand a little tighter. We sat there for a while. The soup cooled. Outside the window, a cloud moved across the early afternoon sun, and the room changed temperature slightly and then changed back. Nathan, she said after a while. Her voice had shifted into something more careful. The group chat. I looked at her. Kevin told me you had your phone back. He said he wasn't sure what. She stopped, started again. I want to explain some of those messages. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She met my eyes. I want to. I waited. We were scared, she said. People say things when they're scared that they don't, that aren't. She shook her head. Kevin didn't mean it the way it sounds. What way does it sound, Mom? She didn't answer that. And in her not answering, in the specific, careful silence of a woman who loved her children and knew, in this moment, that defending one of them would require her to lie to another. I heard something I'd been needing to hear for a long time. Not an excuse, not an explanation, just the silence that meant, I know what it sounds like. I know because I read it too, and I know my son, and I know what he meant, and I can't tell you it's not what you think because it is what you think. I squeezed her hand once. It's okay, Mom, I said. It wasn't, but it was the truth I had available right then. And sometimes that's what you give the people you love, the true thing they can actually receive, rather than the true thing that would only cause more damage. She stayed for 2 hours. When she left, she kissed my forehead. She hadn't done that since I was a child. After she was gone, I opened the notebook again. I added one more thing. Not a quote, not a message. Just a question I'd been circling for days that I finally wrote down in plain language so I couldn't keep pretending I wasn't asking it. If I had died, actually died, out there on that hillside, what would they have missed? I sat with that for a long time. The honest answer, I was beginning to understand, was not the same as the answer I'd spent 20 years telling myself. They would have missed what I did. They would have missed the function I performed, the weight I carried, the gap I filled. They would have missed the money, the availability, the competence, the reliability. They would have missed the person who drove through storms because someone needed something. Whether they would have missed me, Nathan, specifically, the person inside the function, was a different question. One I didn't know how to answer yet. One I was no longer willing to avoid. The worst message wasn't in the group chat. It wasn't in Kevin's texts to Marcus, or Dana's voicemail, or the cascade of practical questions about savings accounts and 401ks and whether the car was paid off. It was a voicemail left by Kevin on Sunday evening, the second day, the day before the truck was found, on a number I recognized as belonging to our cousin Ricky. A misdial, I think. The message was meant for someone else entirely, and Kevin hadn't realized he'd called the wrong number. And so it had just sat there in Ricky's voicemail until Ricky, who did not know it was there, who had forgotten Kevin had called at all, handed me his phone on Thursday to show me something else entirely. And I saw the notification, and I pressed play. 47 seconds. Kevin's voice. Loose, late, a little blurred at the edges. The sound of someone who'd been drinking, not heavily, just enough to lower the threshold between thinking and saying. Man, I don't know. It's messed up. Like, I keep thinking about all the times I gave him a hard time, you know? All the times he'd call to check in and I'd let it go to voicemail because I just didn't feel like getting a lecture. And now, a pause. I mean, the thing is, Nate always made it so easy to take him for granted. Like, he was just always there. You didn't have to worry about him. He handled everything. So you just assumed he'd keep handling it, you know. Another pause, longer. I keep thinking if he's gone, like, actually gone, I don't know who's going to hold all this together. Mom and Dad can't. Dana doesn't want to, and I can't. Let's be honest, I can't. His voice shifted, quieter. I don't think I ever told him that I knew he was the one doing it. I just let him do it and didn't say anything because saying something would have meant, like, having to do something about it. You know, the message ended. I sat in the chair beside Ricky's kitchen table and listened to the silence that came after it. I had expected anger. That's what I thought I'd feel, working through all of this. A clean, clarifying anger, the kind that moves through you like weather and leaves something simpler in its wake. But it wasn't anger. It was something quieter and more complicated, something that had Kevin's voice in it, small and honest at midnight, saying, I just let him do it and didn't say anything because saying something would have meant having to do something about it. That was the most honest thing my brother had said about our relationship in 20 years. Not to me, to a misdial, to empty air, but honest. And the honesty of it was, somehow, the hardest part. Harder than the calculation about the house loan. Harder than Dana's administrative efficiency. Harder than Ricky's questions about the savings account. Because Kevin knew. He had always known. He knew I was carrying it, and he knew he wasn't helping. And he knew the reason he wasn't helping was because I'd made it too easy not to. Because I'd never put the weight down. Because I'd never made the discomfort of depending on me feel like discomfort at all. I had built the system as much as they had. I had maintained it. And now I was sitting in a hospital room and a cousin's kitchen with cracked ribs and a concussion and a notebook full of evidence, trying to figure out what to do with the knowledge that the story I'd been telling myself about who was responsible for what was more complicated than I'd allowed it to be. I closed the notebook. I looked out the window at the ordinary afternoon, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't reach for my phone to call anyone in my family. I just sat there and let the quiet be quiet. The first call I made was to my mother, not because she was the one I most needed to talk to, because she was the one who would be sitting by her phone, and I couldn't make her wait any longer than she already had. It was Tuesday morning. The hospital had confirmed I was stable enough to use a phone. Carol, the nurse who'd brought the notebook, had handed me the temporary handset with a look that said she understood this was a significant moment, and that she was going to give me privacy for it by walking away and not coming back for 20 minutes. I dialed. It rang once. My mother picked up before the second ring had finished, which meant she'd been holding the phone. Which meant she'd been holding it for a while. Nathan. Just my name. But the way she said it. The way it broke slightly in the middle. The way it came out like something she'd been holding in her chest for 3 days and had just now been allowed to put down. I had to close my eyes for a moment. Hey, Mom, I'm okay. The sound she made wasn't crying exactly. It was something before crying, something more elemental. I heard her move, sitting down, I thought, or leaning against something, and then the sound of my father's voice in the background, asking something, and my mother saying, "It's Nathan. He's alive. He's okay." And then my father made a sound I'd never heard him make before. I won't try to describe it precisely. Some sounds don't translate into language without losing what makes them true. It was the sound of a man who had been very afraid for 3 days and had just been given permission to stop being afraid. That's the closest I can get. I told my mother the basics. The hospital, the injuries, the timeline. She asked questions in a voice that kept threatening to come apart and kept holding itself together through what I recognized as sheer maternal determination. She asked if I was in pain. She asked if I'd eaten. She asked if I needed her to come. Not yet, I said. I need a couple more days here, then I'll come home. I'll make soup, she said. And there it was, 20 years of her, compressed into 4 words. The language she had for love that she'd never quite learned to say directly. Soup, presence, showing up with something warm. I know you will, I said. We stayed on the line for a while after we'd run out of practical things to say. Just breathing. Just existing on the same phone call. When we hung up, I sat quietly for a moment. Then I called Kevin. He answered on the 5th ring. Hello. His voice had the careful quality of someone who doesn't recognize the number and is preparing to be sold something. It's Nathan. Silence. Not a short silence. A long one, long enough that I pulled the phone away from my ear to check if the call had dropped. Kevin. Yeah. His voice came back different, compressed. Yeah, Nate, hey. I'm alive, I said. In case you hadn't heard. Mom called me like an hour ago. A pause. I didn't know if you'd want to, he stopped. How are you? Cracked ribs, concussion. I'll be okay. Good. The word came out thin. That's good, I'm really glad. I let the silence sit for a moment. Kevin, I said, I have my phone back. Another silence. This one different in texture from the first. The first had been shock. This one was something else. The specific quality of silence that belongs to a person who has just understood that a conversation they hope to avoid is actually happening. Okay, he said. I've read the group chat. He didn't say anything. I've read your texts to Marcus. Still nothing. And I accidentally got a voicemail you meant to leave for someone else. I kept my voice even. Not cold, just level. The voice I used in work calls when I needed to establish what was true before we could discuss what to do about it. So I have a pretty complete picture. Kevin exhaled. A long, slow breath that carried something in it, not quite relief, because this wasn't a relieving situation. More like the release that comes when something you've been dreading has finally arrived, and you no longer have to dread it. Nate, he said, I don't know what to. You don't have to say anything right now, I said. I'm not calling to fight, I just wanted you to know that I know, and that when I'm out of here we're going to talk. Actually talk. A pause. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, I said. I ended the call. I called Dana next. She picked up on the 2nd ring, and her voice was composed in the way I'd expected, warm but organized, relief that sounded genuine but delivered efficiently, like a report rather than an outburst. She asked about my injuries. She said she was very glad. She said she'd been worried. I said, I know, I read the voicemail you left Mom. A half-beat of silence, barely perceptible, but there. I was trying to help, she said. I know you were, I said. That's kind of the whole thing, isn't it? She didn't respond to that. We said goodbye with the particular politeness of 2 people who are tabling something neither of them is ready to open yet, and both of them know it. I set the phone down. Outside, the afternoon had turned gray, the kind of flat, overcast light that makes everything look provisional. Like the world is waiting to decide what kind of day it's going to be. I opened the notebook. I wrote they were all relieved. That part was real. Then I wrote, the question is what they were relieved about. I came home on Thursday. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it, laptop on the desk, lights off, the particular stillness of a space that has been empty for almost a week. Frank from next door had watered the plant on my windowsill, which I hadn't asked him to do, which meant he'd noticed it and done it on his own initiative, which was more consideration than I'd received from most of my blood relatives in the previous 72 hours. I made a note to bring him something. I spent the first 2 days doing very little. Resting, mostly. Eating whatever required the least effort. My ribs made everything involving torso rotation an event, and my concussion had left a persistent low-grade headache that worsened when I looked at screens for too long. I slept more than I had in years. On the third day, I called Kevin and told him to come over. He arrived at 7 in the evening. He dressed carefully, not formally, but the way people dress when they're trying to signal that they're taking something seriously. He'd brought beer, which he held up awkwardly when I opened the door, as if it might serve as a gesture of something. "I wasn't sure if you could drink with the concussion," he said. "I can't," I said. "Come in." We sat at my kitchen table. I'd made coffee. He wrapped his hands around the mug without drinking from it. I put my phone on the table between us. I'd organized it before he arrived, screenshotted the relevant messages, saved the voicemail, arranged it in chronological order, the way you arrange things when you want the presentation of information to be undeniable, not dramatic, just clear. Just, here is what happened, in the sequence it happened, and we are going to look at it together. "I'm not here to make you feel worse than you already do," I said. "I think you already feel pretty bad." He looked at the phone. "Yeah, I want to understand something. And I need you to be honest with me, because I'm done having the version of conversations where we both pretend things are fine." He nodded. His hands tightened around the mug. "Did you mean it?" I asked. "The message to Marcus, the group chat, the stuff about the house loan." I kept my eyes on him. Or was that just scared talk? People saying things in a crisis that don't reflect what they actually feel. Kevin was quiet for a long moment. He was looking at the table. Not avoiding the question, exactly, more like locating it. Finding where it actually lived inside him before trying to answer it. When he looked up, his eyes were tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "Both," he said. I waited. "I was scared," he said. "Genuinely, I know how that sounds given what I was saying while I was scared. But I was. I kept calling your phone and getting nothing, and I didn't know what to do with that, so He stopped. "The stuff about the loan, about the money. I think I went there because it was easier than going to the other place." "What's the other place?" He looked at me directly for the first time since he'd sat down. "That you were actually gone," he said. "And that the last time I talked to you it was about rent. And that I'd let it go to voicemail 100 times before that because I didn't feel like hearing whatever you were going to say. And that I never..." He stopped again. His jaw worked. "I never said thank you for any of it. I just took it. And now you might be dead. And the only thing I can think about is a house loan. Because if I think about the actual thing I'm going to..." He didn't finish the sentence. I sat with that. The coffee was getting cold. The apartment was very quiet. Outside, a car passed, and then another, and then the street was silent again. "I heard your voicemail," I said. "The one you left for Ricky by mistake." He closed his eyes. "You said you let me carry it, because it was easier than doing something about it." He nodded, eyes still closed. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me in probably 10 years, I said. He opened his eyes. "I know," he said. "So here's what I need you to understand." I leaned forward slightly, carefully. My ribs registered the movement and I ignored them. "I'm not angry at you for being human, for being scared and going to the wrong place. I'm not even angry about the money, not exactly. What I'm angry about, what I've been sitting with for the past week, is 20 years of both of us pretending the arrangement was okay when we both knew it wasn't." Kevin was very still. "You knew," I said. "You said it yourself. You knew I was carrying it and you let it go because I made it easy. And I made it easy because I didn't know how to put it down. And somewhere in that, in both of us choosing the path of least resistance, we built something that looks like a relationship but isn't one. Not really." The silence that followed was long and heavy and necessary. Kevin wasn't looking at the table anymore. He was looking at me, with the expression of someone who has just had a familiar room described to them accurately for the first time, and is discovering that the description and the room are not the same thing. "What do you want me to do?" he said quietly. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I know what I'm going to do." He waited. "I'm going to stop," I said. "The loans, the emergency calls, the driving through storms because someone needs something and I'm the one who shows up." I held his gaze. "Not as punishment. I want to be clear about that. I'm not doing it to hurt you or Mom or anyone. I'm doing it because I've been holding something up that needed to learn how to hold itself up. And I can't keep doing it. And I should have said that 10 years ago." Kevin didn't argue, didn't push back. He just nodded, slowly. The way people nod when they're accepting something they've known was coming for a long time. We sat there for another hour. We talked, really talked, For maybe the first time in our adult lives, without the armor of practicality, without the agenda of a request or a favor or a crisis to be managed. It was halting and imperfect, and there were silences that neither of us tried to fill. When he left, he stood in the doorway for a moment. "I'm glad you're not dead," he said. "I know," I said. "I mean it. I know you do, Kevin." He left. I stood at the closed door for a moment. Then I went back to the kitchen table, sat down, and opened the notebook to a clean page. I didn't write anything. I just sat there in the quiet of my apartment, with my cracked ribs and my fading headache, and the cold coffee and the notebook. And I felt the particular stillness of a person who has just put down something very heavy. Not healed, not resolved, just lighter, for the first time in a long time. Lighter. My parents wanted a family dinner. My mother proposed it, which meant my father had asked her to propose it, which was how decisions moved in that household. My father forming the thought, my mother carrying it. She called on a Sunday, 10 days after I'd come home, and said she thought it would be good for everyone to be together. She said it carefully, with the particular care of someone who understands that the thing they're asking for might be refused. I said yes, not because I was ready. I'm not sure ready was the right category for what this was. I said yes, because I understood that certain conversations have a weight that accumulates the longer you defer them, and I'd been carrying enough weight for long enough that I was done letting things accumulate. They came on a Saturday afternoon. My parents' house. The same house I'd grown up in, the same kitchen table where I'd sat for 36 years of holiday meals and ordinary Sundays, and the specific kind of family gathering that functions as maintenance, everyone present, nothing actually said. My mother had cooked. Of course she had. The soup and something else and the particular smell of the house that meant, this is where you come from, whether you want to or not. Kevin arrived first. He'd been different since our kitchen table conversation, quieter, less performative, the specific quality of a person who has had something named that they can no longer pretend doesn't exist. He hugged me when he came in. A real one, not the shoulder tap variety. It lasted long enough to mean something. Dana had flown in. This surprised me. Portland to here was not a short trip, and Dana did not make short trips casually. She appeared at the door with a rolling carry-on and the composed expression she always wore in family contexts, and she hugged me too. And for a moment, just a moment, the composure slipped, and I felt her actually hold on. "I'm sorry," she said quietly into my shoulder. "I know," I said. "We didn't elaborate. We didn't need to." My father shook my hand when I came into the living room, and then changed his mind and put both arms around me, which was more than he'd done at any point in recent memory. His hands on my back were large and uncertain, the hands of a man who knows he should have been doing this more often, and is trying to make up for it in a single gesture. We sat around the table. My mother served the soup. The meal had the texture of something suspended, everyone present, everyone aware that the real conversation was waiting in the room with us, patient and immovable, until we were ready to turn and face it. My father turned first. "I want to say something," he said. The table went quiet. My father didn't often begin sentences that way. It was the verbal equivalent of him clearing a space. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what kind of father lets his son drive through a storm because his wife needed a furnace question answered." He said it plainly. No performance. The kind that's been taking for granted that his son will always show up. The kind that stopped asking whether showing up was costing him something. He looked at me. "That's on me," he said. "Not your mother, not Kevin, me. I'm the one who should have said years ago, 'Nathan, you don't have to do all of this.' And I didn't say it, because it was easier not to." The room was very still. My mother had her hands folded on the table. Kevin was looking at his soup. Dana was watching my father with an expression I'd never seen on her, something unguarded, something that might have been the face she wore in private, when she wasn't managing anything. "Dad," I said, "let me finish." He wasn't harsh about it, just clear. "I talked to Kevin this week, about the group chat, about the messages, and I want you to know that it made me ashamed. Not of Kevin, not really, of the family we built, where that was even possible, where someone could think, while their brother was missing, about a house loan." He shook his head. "We built that. Your mother and I built that by teaching you, without meaning to, that your job was to carry things, and teaching your brother and sister, without meaning to, that their job was to let you." Kevin made a sound, small, compressed. He was still looking at his soup. I know, Kevin said. Dad, I know. Dana unfolded her hands and refolded them. We all know, she said quietly. That's what makes it hard to sit here. I looked around the table. At my father, who had just said more true things in 4 minutes than I could remember him saying in 4 years. At my mother, whose eyes were bright, and who was holding herself together with the specific effort of a woman who has decided that this moment requires her to hold herself together. At Kevin, who looked like someone standing in the wreckage of something and trying to figure out what's salvageable. At Dana, who had flown across the country and was sitting in the family she'd spent a decade managing from a safe distance, and was not, for once, managing anything. I thought about the notebook, the messages, the voicemail, the 47 seconds of my brother being honest into empty air. I thought about 20 years. And then I said what I'd been carrying since the hospital ceiling. Here's what I need you to understand, I said. All of you. They looked at me. I'm not angry. I meant it. The anger had moved through me and left something quieter in its place. Not peace exactly, but something that had the structure of peace even if it hadn't finished building itself. I spent a week being angry, and then I spent another week trying to figure out what was underneath the anger. And what's underneath it is this. I paused. I did this too. I want to be clear about that. I built this system as much as any of you. Every time I showed up without being asked. Every time I said yes before anyone finished the sentence. Every time I transferred money without having the conversation about why it kept being needed. I looked at Kevin. I made it easy. And making it easy felt like love to me. But it wasn't love. It was something that looked like love and functioned like love but was actually closer to needing to be needed. Needing to be the one who held it together. Because if I wasn't that, I didn't know what I was. The table was very quiet. The accident changed something, I said. Not because of what you said in the group chat. I've made my peace with that. People say things in fear that they don't fully mean, and also sometimes do fully mean, and both can be true at the same time. What changed it was something Kevin said. By accident. Into a voicemail he didn't know I'd hear. Kevin looked up. You said you knew, I said. You knew you were letting me carry it. And you let it go on because I'd made it easy, and because doing something about it would have required actually doing something. I held his gaze. That's the most honest thing anyone in this family has ever said about how we work, and I need that to be the new floor, for all of us. Honesty as the floor, not the exception. My mother reached across the table and put her hand on mine. Same gesture as the hospital. Same small, warm hand. What do you need from us? She asked. Nothing dramatic, I said. No grand gestures, just I need to not be the emergency number anymore. I need to not be the person you call when something breaks. Because I've become the solution so automatically that nobody ever developed a backup plan. I looked at her gently. You and Dad need to have a plan for the furnace that doesn't involve me. Kevin needs to build a financial situation that doesn't have my number in it as a safety net. I looked at Dana. And you don't have to come back here and be part of this family. That's a genuine choice you're allowed to make. But if you do come back, actually come back. Not manage it from Portland. Be here. Dana nodded. One nod, small and definitive. I'm going to do better, she said. It wasn't a performance. It was a statement of intent delivered by someone who knows the difference. Kevin said, me too. And then, I know that probably doesn't mean much right now. It means something, I said. It just means something that has to be proved over time. That's okay. I've got time. My father, who had been quiet since his speech, said, so do we. We finished the soup. Afterward, we did something I hadn't expected. We stayed at the table. Not processing, not circling back to the conversation. Just staying. My mother told a story about one of her students. Kevin mentioned something he'd seen on the drive over. My father asked about my ribs. Dana talked about a project she was working on in Portland. Actually talked about it, with detail, the way you talk about things you're genuinely engaged with. It wasn't repaired. I want to be clear about that. Families don't repair in an afternoon, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. What it was the first meal we'd had in as long as I could remember where everyone at the table was actually present. Not performing, not managing, not calculating. Just there. It was, I thought, a start. The changes didn't happen all at once. That's not how changes happen, despite what the story versions of our lives suggest. They happen in increments. In the small, accumulative decisions that don't feel significant in the moment, but add up, over weeks and months, into something you can look back at and recognize as different. I stopped being the first call. This required a period of discomfort that I'd expected, and my family hadn't. Kevin called twice in the first month with situations that had, in previous years, automatically routed to me a car issue, a billing dispute with a landlord. The first time, I listened and then said, "What have you tried so far?" and walked him through the process of solving it himself. The second time, he'd already started working on it before he called and was calling to say he thought he had it handled. He just wanted to check his reasoning. I told him his reasoning was sound. That phone call cost me nothing. It was the easiest conversation we'd had in years. My mother learned to ask the furnace company questions directly. She called me afterward, not before, and reported what they'd said with a competence that had always been there, underneath the habit of deferring. My father found a system for the paperwork that didn't involve the accordion file in my car. He sent me a photo of it, a color-coded binder, labeled in his handwriting, sitting on the shelf in his office. No explanation, just the photo. I stared at that photo for a long time. Dana called more. Not to manage, not to coordinate, just to talk, the way people call when they've decided that a relationship is worth maintaining for its own sake rather than as an obligation. She came back for Christmas and stayed 4 days and was, by the standards we were building, actually present. We argued once about something minor and resolved it the same day, which was more than we'd managed in the previous decade. I left my job in February. Not dramatically. I gave proper notice. I finished what I'd been working on. I left on good terms with people I'd worked alongside for 7 years. But the accident had done something to my sense of urgency about things I'd been deferring. A list of projects, ideas, versions of my professional life that I'd kept saying I'd get to when things settled down. Things had settled down. I got to them. I won't pretend it was all clean. There were weeks when the old patterns reasserted themselves. When my mother called with something minor, and I felt the automatic pull towards solving it immediately, and had to consciously stop and ask myself, does this actually require me, or does it just feel that way because I've been the answer for so long? There were times Kevin slipped, and I had to decide in real time whether this was a genuine emergency or a test of the new arrangement. There were conversations with Dana that hit old grooves and required effort to redirect. But effort, I was learning, was different from the kind of carrying I'd been doing. Effort was chosen. Effort was bounded. Effort didn't quietly hollow you out over 20 years until you were driving through a storm at night, on an errand that wasn't really yours, because you couldn't find the muscle in yourself that knew how to say, "This time, I can't." In April, 6 months after the accident, I drove back to Route 9. Not to the hospital, not to my parents' house, to the curve in the road. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. The evidence of the accident had long since been absorbed. The tire marks weathered away, the gouge in the hillside beginning to fill in with new growth, the Douglas firs standing as they always had, indifferent and tall. I pulled over and got out and stood on the shoulder of the road for a while, looking down the embankment at where the truck had come to rest. The truck was gone. It had been hauled out weeks after the accident, assessed as totaled, processed by the insurance company into a number on a check that I'd deposited and not thought much about. What remained was just the hillside, the trees, the road. I stood there and thought about the drive that night. The rain, the wipers working hard, the familiar curve that I'd stopped treating as something requiring attention. I thought about what the accident had taken. 6 weeks of physical recovery, a truck, 3 days of my family believing I was gone. And what it had given, 72 hours of truth, unasked for, unfiltered. The kind of truth that only surfaces when people believe there's no longer any reason to manage it. When they think the audience has left and they're just talking to themselves. I had been the audience. I had heard everything. The thing about truth, I've come to understand, is that it doesn't arrive clean. It doesn't arrive at a time that's convenient or in a form that's easy to receive. It arrives the way the accident arrived, sudden, in bad conditions, and expensive. But what you do with it afterward is yours. I chose to put down what I'd been carrying. I chose to rebuild on the honest version of things, rather than the comfortable version. I chose to stop being load-bearing for a structure that had never been designed to support itself. Because designing it to support itself was the only way it would ever actually stand. These were not easy choices. They were not dramatic ones. They were the ordinary, daily choices of a person who has decided that his life is his own. Not a service, not an emergency line, not a resource to be drawn on until it runs dry. I stood on the shoulder of Route 9 for a while longer. Then I got in my car, a new one, sensible brake pads in good condition, and I drove. Not home, not to my parents' house, not to anyone's emergency, just forward, down the road that had almost taken everything from me, and given me, in exchange, the only thing that had ever actually been mine, the truth, and enough clarity to know what to do with it. For 3 days, my family thought I was dead, and in those 3 days, they finally told me the truth. Not the truth they would have chosen to tell me, the truth that lives underneath, the version people perform when they know they're being watched. I don't carry what I found there as a wound anymore. I carried it that way for a while in the hospital, in my apartment, at the kitchen table with Kevin, at my parents' house with the soup going cold. I held it the way you hold something that's still hot. But heat fades. What remains, when the heat has faded, is just information. And information, unlike grief, can be used. I used it to stop. I used it to start. I used it to build something smaller and more honest than what came before. A life that belongs to me. Relationships that exist because people chose them rather than inherited them. A version of my family that is imperfect and still finding its shape, but is, for the first time, operating on something closer to truth. The accident didn't destroy my life. It exposed it. And what I found, once the exposure was complete, was that the life underneath, the one I'd been deferring, the one I'd been too busy holding everyone else up to build, was still there, waiting, patient as the Douglas firs on that hillside, ready to grow.